I'm Sophia Elliott. As a parent of 3 gifted kids, I'm here to talk about all things gifted because I've been isolated and uncertain, and I felt like that parent. Then I found peace of mind, support, and my community. This podcast is about sharing that journey, actually parenting gifted kids, and connecting with advice and support. So we have everything we need for every member of our family to thrive. This is the Our Gifted Kid podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today. I am very excited to have William Kirk, the host of Hacking Your ADHD, with us. And it is really quite exciting because my husband has been listening to William's podcast for quite a while now, and it was instrumental in quite a few aha moments in terms of ADHD in this household. So, William, welcome. I'm really pleased to have you here today.
So glad to be here and glad to hear that my show has been helping. That's always good to hear. Often you're throwing stuff out into the void and you don't know how well it's going over. I do hear some stuff. All the individual stories of how things have helped really are awesome to hear.
I totally get that. We'll just do this podcast and throw it out there and hopefully it's helpful. No, it definitely has been really helpful. Is it weird being the guest on a podcast?
This is either my second or third guest appearance, and it's a bit different being on this side of things because my brain's already, I have questions I could ask.
Likewise, I've done it a couple of times myself, and I get to the end and it's not like buyer's remorse, but it's like podcast remorse where it's, oh my God, what did I just say? I don't know why it's different being asked the questions rather than asking the questions, but it feels very weird and odd.
From my perspective, I don't really consider myself an expert because I don't have any degrees in the field or anything of mental health. I have a degree in English, but that's not entirely relevant other than I do a lot of writing for my show. But it's often like, oh yeah, I'm not an expert, even though I do have a good amount of knowledge around the field. I spend a lot of time researching. When I talk to people, I realize I have more knowledge in this field than I realize.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get that. I'm the same, coming at it from that lived experience approach, underestimating how much you learn along the way. I think what I have certainly experienced in coming to terms with my own ADHD is actually talking to people about the lived experience. And it's those moments that have allowed me to go, oh, what, everyone doesn't do that, or that's a thing, or I totally do that, didn't realize that had a name. And it's really from resonating with people with that lived experience where you get those examples that had really helped to figure a lot of stuff out. What made you start your podcast? It's been about 4 years, is that right?
Yeah, it has. I don't remember which year I was diagnosed in, like 2008, 2007, around there. And I went on medication, and then that was promptly all I did for my ADHD. And while I really strongly encourage people to seek out medication to help with ADHD management, there is a world of other things that you can be doing to help manage your ADHD that you need to be doing. Because just with medication, I was like, oh, I can goof off really well now. Like I can really focus on reading all the comments on Reddit or whatever. And it was like realizing years later, I'm not getting what I want out of this experience of managing my ADHD, and then looking into it more, doing some coaching, which then also had a lot of that real world experience of seeing other people dealing with the same thing, issues that I was dealing with, being able to put names and ideas to the symptoms I was experiencing, and then also putting skills to that. And then from there, I was like, I would really like keep learning this. I would really like to be able to take what I'm learning and also teach other people about it, because that's just a natural inclination of mine, is to be like, I've learned this thing, I want to share it. And so that was the genesis for the podcast, was being like, hey, I'm learning all this stuff, I want to share it. And I want to do it in really small bite-sized pieces because I know there are a lot of resources out there for ADHD now. So a lot of them are longer, and I'd like to do some like bite-sized things. Because at the time I'd been listening to a number of very short podcasts and been going, I love this format. I want to combine it with this other idea. And then came out with my show, and it was a great way for me to keep researching and learning.
And there is so much to learn, isn't there? It's that recognition of how amazing the medication can be if it works for you, but also that's not the end of the story either. I've been trying to find someone to come on as a guest to talk explicitly about medication. I've still got my fingers crossed there. People tend to be a bit shyer around that. What gave me the courage to try medication out was that I knew quite a few adults who had been diagnosed late and had tried it and were just like, total game changer. And for myself as well, it's been absolutely life-changing. I still went through that phase of, okay, I'm still me. I'm still my beautifully flawed self. It's not like a magic pill.
although it felt like a magic pill initially just because of the quality of life difference it made. But I'm like, okay, still very much I am who I am. And so how can I, like I said, make the most of it? What are the biggest tips and tricks that you have come across outside of medication?
Yeah. So the first one always feels like a cop out answer, but it is really like the biggest key for any of my ADHD management is just really working on accepting that I have ADHD. It feels like a cop out answer because there's not like a single thing you can do to make this happen. Working more and being like, I have ADHD. I'm going to have to do things differently for my brain to be successful. And it's really hard because it's just something that my brain really rebels against. It's like, I should be able to do all these other things. I should just be able to sit down and focus. And I'm like sitting there and shooting on myself, and it's not great. And when I step back and go, okay, but you have ADHD, you can't just do that. You need to figure out something that you can do. It sounds really simple. I got a very good diagnostic criteria. Pretty much everyone in my family has also been diagnosed, and has a very strong genetic component. So it's like, yeah, of course you have ADHD. And then a little part of my brain goes, but maybe not. Maybe you're just trying to get attention or you want to be lazy. And it's being able to go, okay, no, it's ADHD. It's not that I'm lazy, not trying to get attention, and using things where I'm like, oh yeah, I did use these other strategies and they were super helpful for me. Maybe it doesn't matter if I have ADHD. Maybe if I'm just doing things that work for my brain, that's good enough. So that would be the top thing, is just really working through that idea over and over again. I've worked on it a long time. It's still something that can be difficult for me. So being like, yeah, it's going to take work to do this. It's not going to just happen overnight. From there, I think that there's also a lot of things about building routines into your day as best you can, with figuring how you can have ways to follow through with your intentions there. My kids have been instrumental in this because I have very set things in my day. I have to wake up at a certain time with my kids, and I have to take them to school, and I have to pick them up from school, and it builds a scaffolding around my day where these are things I have to do. And that's incredibly useful for me, knowing that there'll be these natural consequences if I don't do things. But I'm like, okay, I want to record a podcast today. Then I have to make sure that I've done these things before my kids get home from school so that I can be ready to do that, because I know I won't do it once they're home.
Yeah, there's nothing like a hard deadline.
And through that, there's a lot of things with different ways to find accountability. I've definitely had people I text with things being like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. I'll text you when I'm done. And I'm like, yeah, I probably would have done it anyways. But knowing that I told someone I was going to do it really makes it harder for me not to follow through on those intentions. There's also a lot of great programs to do that, and things like going and like jumping in Zoom things where I'm just like, oh yeah, I'll just work with these other people for an hour or two. And then I can be like, yeah, I'm going to write for this hour. I'm not even interacting with the other people in Zoom. I'm just sitting there and working, and that's super helpful for my brain to be like, yeah, this is what's going to keep me going. So first, acceptance. Next is routines and systems with accountability, because I know so many of us will be like, yeah, I'm going to set up this routine, not follow through, and then be like, that didn't work. We need the accountability to help make sure we do those things.
They're definitely resonating with all of that. And I think the acceptance piece, like you said, really can't be underestimated. It's only been the last couple of years where I have been diagnosed with various things. And so I went a whole lifetime assuming I was just a typical person. There's quite a lot of processing to then go, oh, actually, hang on. There are these diagnoses like ADHD, which explains so much about the previous 45 years. And yeah, it does take a long time to shift that mindset to, hang on, there's an answer for those things. I'm a little bit kinder and more compassionate to myself and not have these expectations of things that are clearly really challenging. It's actually, I think that there's a lot in that. I can imagine I'll continue to process that for quite some time. And likewise, when I got my diagnosis, I had a hard look around my family and pointed a few family members in that direction. I'm like, yeah, you really need to try this medication out. This is really going to help you. Like, obviously, adults within my broader family unit. And so it's that knock-on effect, I think, as well, the domino effect of looking at the family. And now we're obviously looking at the kids a little bit more as well. But also in understanding it helps, because then you know what to look for a little more easily. I was laughing to myself when you were talking about having that accountability and the hard deadline of, at this point, I have to go get my kids, or at this point, I have to do these things, or that you tell someone about it. Because when I first started out with this podcast a few years ago, I was mildly terrified of the idea of going live on social media. And so I made a commitment to do it for like 30 days in a row live on social media. And then I was like, okay, I have to do this now every single day. And sometimes it'd be like 11 p.m. and I'm like, it's still today. I'm just going to do it. Damn it. And that sort of positive pressure on myself often will help me get over the line for something that I'm really procrastinating about or struggling to just do. With some of my friends recently, we've been talking about getting together and do that parallel working where you're just working side by side as that accountability. Except I'm not so sure whether we'll just end up talking or actually doing work. So we haven't quite tried it yet. I think it took me so long to get that diagnosis because I, like many people, just assumed ADHD was very typified by the sort of hyperactive boys, so presentation. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there? So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Pop culture is the worst thing. It drives me nuts because it just doesn't signify what ADHD really is. And makes a lot of people go, oh, you have ADHD, but you don't seem like you're super hyperactive. I'm like, it's not just hyperactive in your physical body, although it can be one of the things. People might have heard there's like different types of ADHD. Actually, I'm going to go back even further for a second because a lot of people go, okay, there's ADD and there's ADHD. Why are we only talking about ADHD? And it's amazing that ADD is such a term because it was a term in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Conditions, and is this huge book of all mental disorders. And ADD was in there for 5 years, maybe. It was not in there for a very long time before it was then reassigned into ADHD. And then ADHD was broken up into 3 categories of hyperactive, inattentive, and then combined where it was symptoms of both. And at the time they were called subtypes, but now that's been changed into presentations because ADHD can change as you get older because at its core, it's a developmental disorder. And so it's not something that's going to be 100% the same when you're a kid as when you're an adult. So the hyperactive, impulsive presentation, you can see a lot of things like being fidgety or restless, incredibly talkative. This is something you'd often see a lot more with girls and women. They're being the typical, very chatty kind. My daughter is like this. She does not stop talking, and it's adorable at times, but also like we need a break sometimes too. And along with this hyperactivity, you see lots of impulse regulation problems, people just being impulsive, doing things. And that can be a little hard to pinpoint because sometimes I'm like, I'm not very impulsive. And then I'm like, yeah, but I can't stop myself from pulling up my phone and checking it every 3 seconds. And I'm like, oh, I'm being impulsive there. It's not impulsive hyperactivity. It's just impulsively doing things and not even thinking about why I'm doing them. Other things you might see being disruptive in class or work or having trouble waiting your turn. With the inattentive side, which was for a while seen as predominantly in girls, that's less the case. About 90% of diagnoses are going to include some of the inattentive characteristics, and those are often like careless mistakes, short attention span, poor listening skills, being incredibly disorganized. This is often where people get the laziness idea from ADHD. Oh, they seem very apathetic or something. It's a lot of distractibility, forgetfulness, unable to follow through with your commitments. This one I often see is when someone's like referred to as scatterbrained or just staring out the window or something. It's not that super hyperactivity that we typically imagined with ADHD. And then, of course, there's the combined presentation, which is just both lists combined, staring out the window, but being incredibly restless with what you're doing, or in some cases not doing. You're so bored, you can't control yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of that resonates. And I think what's really interesting is considering the different ways, like you said there, that things present themselves. So like impulsiveness brings to mind certain things with kids, but actually when you think about an adult, like I wouldn't necessarily consider myself to be impulsive, but then I think about all of the micro impulsive things. It's like picking up the phone. It's literally checking my calendar like 50 times a day. What am I supposed to be doing over and over, shifting from one thing to another and not quite finishing it. It's like, no, finish that first, and staying on task and those kinds of things. It can be confronting to realize that's not typical. It's just the way that your brain works, the way things have always been, the experience that you've always had.
Yeah. And it's also something where people listen to this list of symptoms and go, but everyone has those symptoms. But the reason that they're listed as symptoms is because it's not like this stuff happens some of the time. If I don't have the specific basket that I put my keys in when I walk in my door, I will lose my keys every single time. And it's the difference between everyone having these symptoms and ADHD is that these are chronic and they are disruptive to our normal life. We cannot just function normally as someone neurotypically would.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference, isn't it? The point at which it impacts your ability and quality of life. And I think one of the things that I've been reading about and thinking about is that difference between what it looks like in an adult versus a child and working through some of those stereotypes. For instance, one of my children really struggles to get to sleep. And we've tried many things over the years. And I think recently in working with their psychologist, I've actually realized that the inattentive brain and the dialogue inside the head is actually preventing them from getting to sleep because suddenly they're laying there. There's no distractions except for what's going on in their head. It is like going round and round in circles, keeping them awake. So it can impact your life in really different ways that you might not anticipate.
I have had sleep issues for many years now, very common with ADHD. And yeah, it's I don't have enough stimulation to go to sleep. With my kids, we always have sleep stories that they listen to go to sleep because it's something that they can focus on. I have one child that has a little bit of anxiety. So when she's going to sleep, if she doesn't have something that she's focusing on, then she gets all these scary thoughts about giant spiders or something. You can't just be like, just don't think about spiders because that never is going to work. So, okay, so how can I redirect you? Okay, let's listen to the stories we listen to are Moshi stories. Listen to the Moshi. We're going to just really focus on what they're saying. I'm going to rub your back and we're just going to try and really focus on that. Or also just being like, redirect the thoughts. So I'm like, okay, so you have giant spiders there. Can we turn them into something that's less scary?
Yeah, giant something else. I think that's something that I found interesting as well, is that idea that the best way to wind down is actually to have things going on that distract you enough to wind down. Because I also have always had sleep challenges, getting to sleep or having kids being woken up in the middle of the night and then not being able to get back to sleep, even though you're laying there going, sleep, and I'm not going to think of things and just even when I'm not stressed, stop going around and around my head. I've been playing with this idea myself in terms of if there are things going on, it'll distract my brain enough to allow me to get to sleep or relax. And I'd never thought to apply that to myself, even though likewise we've been doing various sleep music and things for the kids over the years. And it changes things when I think you can label them and change the narrative. So it's gone from, oh, it's just insomnia to, oh, actually, this is my inattentive ADHD brain. So if I look at it from that perspective, how can I approach this problem differently and find something that might actually work? And I think that's the power in the diagnosis, having a different basket of tools to think about in terms of solving some of those problems.
Yeah. I've heard many people say they didn't like the idea of someone getting diagnosed because then they're being labeled by something. And I'm like, yeah, but they already have a label that's way worse. Oh, you're lazy or unmotivated or you're not applying yourself. And so with having that diagnosis, how can I use that to help me figure out what I want to do and how to do it? And then along with that, I think it's also just, you were saying there with the reframing your thoughts and stuff, it's really useful. One of the most common therapy techniques for ADHD is CBT and the cognitive behavioral therapy. And the main thing about that is just asking you to question your thoughts. And for ADHD, that's fairly useful, being like, oh, go, can never remember to do this. We can go, okay, is that true? And then maybe it is true, but then can I do something about that? Is it true that there's nothing I can do? There are things I can do to help me remember things with setting reminders or asking for help. And so being able to go, okay, let me just slow down, question what I'm thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like you say, people like, oh, I don't want to have a label. And I think as adults, those labels can be around, I'm just broken, I can't adult properly. And like you said earlier, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. So one way or another, we're giving ourselves and other people labels. And if we can actually just make that an accurate label, we can reframe some of those challenges. And because it presents differently in everyone, like we've talked about sleep, which I hadn't thought to discuss, and that hasn't come up before, but a very real consequence of the ADHD brain. So I'm just interested in perhaps some of the other ways that it manifests in day-to-day life.
We talked about this a bit before we started recording about just how we can be far more injury prone
Yeah.
as I have my bruised rib and dislocated shoulder and torn quad. And I'm like, my body's falling apart. But more than that, the number of times I've just nicked myself, a little cut, I go through a lot of Band-Aids because I do the little things that do that. I do a lot of the walking, being like, okay, I know you need to go get this from another room, and coming back and being like, why did I leave this room? Why am I leaving
Yes.
here? It's related to this thing called the doorway effect, where your brain reprocesses new information as soon as you get through. It happens so much with ADHD.
I know how many times this morning I was like, right, hang on, I'm here. I had to do a thing. What was the thing? And I'm like trying to step back and remember what the thing was because it was there a second ago. That's really hard. It makes it really hard to get things done.
Yeah, when we were talking about kids earlier too, not being able to keep sitting at the dinner table. My kids have to get up 3 or 4 times at least every meal. It's frustrating for me. I just want you to finish eating your food. But also I know I do that while I'm working. Oh, I need to go get that thing. My Apple Watch has this like goal of standing up for 1 minute every hour for 12 hours. I'm like, never miss that ever because I'm always standing up, go get something. And
Yeah.
oh yeah, this is not a challenge.
Yeah. Likewise, our family dinners, we're all at the table. 30 seconds later, one child literally, and it's probably not great to do when you're trying to consume food. We've got a big memory foam bean bag in the lounge room. So we'll just take a running jump and it'll be like, okay, one more jump, then back to the table, eat a bit more, and then something else and back to the table. And it's just this sort of process of managing a few mouthfuls in between these bursts of hyperactivity and having to reset as a parent and go, this is just what dinner looks like. But persisting at the same time, because I know that in an hour and a half when it's bedtime, it'll be like, oh, actually, suddenly now I'm hungry. I want to eat. Like, I really want to go to bed. Yeah.
I know that one very well from this evening, in fact. Literally 10 minutes after she left the table, she's like, I'm actually kind of hungry still. I'm like, okay, let's have some crackers or something. No, you're not feeling the best right now, so let's try and make sure you get food. I mean, that happens with me as well, though, where I'm like, I know it's time to eat, but I don't really want to do it. It can make having lunch really hard. And I'm like, oh, I'll just keep putting off. I had to put lunch on my calendar because I would consistently not eat it. Get to like 3 or 4 in the afternoon and be so hungry that I'm like, okay, I'm just going to grab handfuls of chocolate chips and shove them in my mouth. And I'm like, that's not good lunch. It's not lunchtime anyways, but that's not a snack either.
Yeah, this laughter is pure recognition. That's me most days. I haven't put lunch in my calendar yet, but I will be the same. I will happily work and I don't tend to get hungry. And of course, the medication I'm on for ADHD, you really got to be careful about because it does suppress hunger a bit. And so I wasn't great on that already. And so now I'm making more effort, but I do the same thing. Often we'll just end up eating some rubbish because it's quick and easy. And so that's a really tricky thing. And it's the same with my kids. Food is so challenging and eating is so challenging. And I was thinking while you were talking about that, it's that whole thing of there's this thing, I want to do it. I know I should do it, but for some reason I'm not doing it. And it's really hard to do. And that can apply to eating, a work thing, a fun thing, or taking care of myself thing, like any kind of thing. And it's just this resistance to doing the thing. When the kids are like that as well, it's challenging to push through and, for example, make sure we are all eating and
that's
not going to bed hungry.
This is all related to executive dysfunction, which, while not part of the diagnostic criteria for ADHD, I don't understand why it isn't. Because when I've looked over what executive dysfunction is and looked over what the symptoms of ADHD are, I'm like, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Understanding executive dysfunction has been one of the big things for me accepting ADHD, because I like look at it and I go, oh, okay, this is ADHD. This is why I'm doing these things, unable to like follow through with my plans. And I have a limited supply of executive function throughout the day. And that's going to be affected by, did I get good sleep? Am I eating? Am I staying hydrated? Did I get outside and walk around in the sun? All these things are going to affect whether I have a good amount of executive function for the day. And if I don't, I'm going to really struggle with simple things. People are like, you're still going to do the things you want to do. I'm like, no, I'll be like, I want to go play video games. Can't make myself do that for some reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't thought of it in this context before, but I'm really rubbish at resting or relaxing or doing things for me that are fun. And I've never thought of it with, I don't know if it's within that ADHD context, but it's very challenging. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but there are some inherent strengths within ADHD as well. Are you able to share some of those with us?
Yeah, I do like to start this piece off with the context that the strengths of ADHD come from well-managed ADHD that has a lot of support around it. And so it can feel, I like to keep that in mind, because you hear people online being like, ADHD is a superpower. And I'm like, it's really not. You just have really good support systems around you so that you're not being overwhelmed. If I never had to clean my house, I had either a spouse that was really good at cleaning, or I had cleaning services, or, any of those things where I didn't have to do those tasks. That's a huge load off my executive function. And I can do a lot of other things like preparing food. I didn't have to do that. That would be amazing. It is shockingly hard to feed myself. I have to figure out what the food is, and it has to be good for me, and it has to be done at least 3 times a day. But then if I have all of that stuff in place, there are some things like creativity is something that really excel at with ADHD. We see things in way different ways than other people do, and can be really good at connecting ideas and seeing new ways of doing things. With my show name being Hacking Your ADHD, I like the idea of hacking as being a ingenious way of finding a solution for something. And I'm like, oh, perfect. That's what I do with my ADHD all the time. How I look at problems. How can I solve this in a cool new way? Because part of the creativity comes from the fact that I get bored doing things the way they're supposed to be done. How can I do this in a different way that would make me excited to do it? And so that's where a lot of my creativity was going like, okay, let's just do things my way, even if it's not the best way to do it. And sometimes it ends up being a very good way to do things. ADHD can also be great for making friends. If you look through the symptoms list, you go, okay, talkative. That's a great way to be with other people. Are impulsive. You're great at starting new things. There's a lot of correlation between entrepreneurship and ADHD. A lot of us are starting businesses because we want to do things. But this is also a list of leadership qualities. He struggles to wait their turn. They want to be first. They're looking to do that. They're being disruptive. They're standing up for those things. All of the symptoms, when not on the negative spiral, not being awful, can be looked at as being a very positive thing. You're restless. You have to keep doing things. Yeah, we have trouble resting, and that's not a great thing. Boredom can be a problem with ADHD. I don't get bored that often because I'm always finding something to do. Doesn't matter where I am. I'm going to find something and I'm going to make it fun, which again, great quality for having friends. You're like, hey, we don't know what to do. I'm like, I will figure out something for us to do.
Yeah, something impulsive and creative. Let's go do it. Yeah.
I see a lot of the ADHD being not entirely negative if you are able to manage it. I feel like that's such an important part, because if you're unable to manage it, it can be a really big struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that you placed all that within that context, because I agree. The sort of idea that neurodivergence of whatever sort is a superpower. Okay, I get where you're coming from. There can be some inherent strengths, but that only comes from individuals, like you say, who have that support and accommodation, and therefore have the energy to thrive, because they're not expending the energy we have in just getting through the day to day and making things happen. I think it's a really interesting way of looking at our kids as well as ourselves and reframing our expectations in terms of, okay, where are we at today? Is it reasonable to have these expectations of ourselves or our kids, given where we're at the moment, what's been going on? Should we expect someone to have that kind of capacity, given this, like you said, the sleep they've had, how they've been eating or looking after themselves, or just where they've had to use that energy or those spoons, in terms of the spoon theory idea, where they've had to use those spoons in life? I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I think it is important to acknowledge that these are areas that can be really positive and can contribute a lot, especially within a diverse group, bringing some of that creativity and impulsiveness into that group, but just highlighting that we definitely need to make sure that we've got all of those supports in place, which is really tricky. And I think goes back to where we started the conversation, the acceptance of ADHD and what it means, and understanding that it's a real thing that needs real support and strategies and accommodations. And as much as, like you said, medication can work for some people, not everyone, you still need all of those strategies around the medication to really help it. So thank you. That's been really interesting to look at those things in a different way today. As we wrap up, I just want to share with everyone where they can find you and your podcast.
All major podcast players should have it. Just search for Hacking Your ADHD. I have a website, hackingYourADHD.com. I'm occasionally on Twitter at Hacking Your ADHD, trying to find a new social media home. I don't do social media well. It's not mesh with my ADHD particularly well.
Yeah, it's hard. I feel you there.
I oscillate between being on there way too much and then being on there once every 2 weeks, which is not a great way to manage social presence. Main place is just check out your podcast player. We have new episodes every Mondays.
Yeah, which I got to say is really impressive. And everyone check it out, Hacking Your ADHD. Like William said, bite-sized episodes, which is something we hugely appreciate in this household and not something I feel capable of doing on this podcast. I'm always like, I'm going to get them like really tight. And then I'm like, that's just really hard. So hats off, respect to keeping them short and sweet. Is there any one last thing you'd like to finish with today?
I was thinking about what we're talking about with kids and stuff. Always remember they are trying their best, just like you're usually trying your best throughout the day. Even if you don't feel like you are, you're trying your best because you have a lot going on. And they're having a hard time too. So they're trying their best and try and work with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a real thing that needs help and support and tools and strategies. And I think it's holding that compassion always with both kids and adults who have ADHD because it's really tricky. Thank you so much, William. I loved having you on the podcast. Thanks for making time for us and talking about ADHD. I really enjoyed looking at things from a different perspective today. Everyone, check out Hacking Your ADHD with William. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and it inspired you in some way, I'd love to hear about your biggest takeaway in the comments. For more episodes, you can subscribe, and to help others find our podcast, please leave a review. You can find show notes and more resources at ourgiftedkids.com and connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. See you in the same place next week.